everyone can join. As you may have just noticed, we've just started the recording as well, so it will be available as a recorded version as well at the end. Okay. I hope everyone's days are going well whilst we just wait for some people to join. I can see it looks very sunny where you are, Carmen, and also Mubarik as well. Looks very sunny in the background where you are.
Deceiving. It's pretty rainy, actually.
Oh.
There's the saying, there's a calm before the storm. This is the calm after the storm.
Yeah.
So,
the
storm
has moved past Mubarak to my house now. So oh, well, I wish you some sunshine soon. Thank you. Okay. Well, it looks like we've got a fair number of people who've joined us today. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to kick off now, and I'm sure a few more people will join as we go. But as I've mentioned, we're recording the session today so that it's available afterwards. Feel free to kind of share it with other colleagues if you, hopefully you'll find the information helpful. I'll start off by just introducing myself and also Carmen and Mubarik, who I'm going to refer to as Mubsy because that's how I always refer to you. Hope you don't mind. And I'm just going to introduce a little bit about the session and then I'm going to pass over really and ask questions to our panelists. But also I'd really welcome everybody on the call today. Please feel free to pop into the chat. There's a Q&A function. Feel free to ask any burning questions you have, in particular, ideally about North America recruitment to the UK, as that's really what the focus is for this session. But I'm sure that there may be other questions as well. So feel free to put them in the chat throughout and we'll make sure that there's time at the end to answer any. So this webinar is called Maximising Student Recruitment from North America. We're going to cover mainly three core topics, and the first one being what's the state of the market, what's happening in regards to market insight on North America, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. We're also going to talk about how to personalize and attract students, in particular from the US, but also from Canada to come to study in the UK. And then finally, we're going to talk about postgraduate student recruitment because we think that this is really key, particularly with potentially imminent news following the MAC review. It could be ever more important to maximise recruitment from many, many different countries into postgraduate programmes in the UK. So those are going to be our three main topics, but we welcome questions throughout as well on any other topics you'd like to be covered. So I'll introduce myself first. So my name's Kate Barnes. I work for Acumen, which is part of the SADAM S4 group. And we work with a large number of universities who have staff based in the US. And we help universities in regards to their internationalization strategies, helping in regards to partnership development, as well as having people on the ground that are the local market experts really in student recruitment, as well as the partnership space. And I'm going to pass over now, Carmen, actually, if I pass over to you, do you want to introduce yourself first and then pass on to Mubsy?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm the representative for Queen Mary University of London. I'm based in Wisconsin, and I cover recruitment for US US, Canadian, and Caribbean undergraduate and postgraduate. Yeah.
Thanks, Carmen.
Yeah. And I'm Mubsy Mubarik, and I represent University of Southampton, based out of Des Moines, Iowa. And I cover pretty much the same North America undergrad, postgrad as well, with a little dabble of study abroad and partnerships.
Brilliant. Thank you both. So I'm going to dive straight in to, I think, one of the big questions we have at the moment in the US is in regards to the enrolment cliff, as I'm sure many on the call have heard it referenced. I think the demographic data sometimes looks really positive. There's been a huge number of increase in passports being issued for US citizens, which shows a kind of real internationalization, wanting and an appetite to maybe study overseas. But then I think what we're also hearing is that there's this looming enrollment cliff for college-age students. So I guess with that in mind, as well as the current election that is underway, there's a lot happening in the US. I know this year we've had delays with FAFSA funding, which has also impacted student recruitment, and also more and more universities becoming test optional. So there's I would say, a fair number of things that are influencing and maybe making your jobs more difficult, but maybe in some ways you're seeing some more opportunities as well. So I guess my first question is really around the enrolment cliff. How are you seeing this impact the behavior of both universities locally in the US as well as universities internationally, particularly from the UK?
Yeah, I can hop on that one. So I think with the US universities, I think one thing has really been the increase in outreach they do to students. So that can be both the emails they send, which I think that can sometimes be something that works against them a little bit. I think right now the average student that I've talked to, they get about 10 to 15 emails a day from universities. So that might be an area that we're reaching out a little bit too much. But I think that also is, they're going to schools more often. They're finding ways to kind of customize their communications, send like a little bit more swag to students that are either applying or potentially applying. But I think with, international and UK, I think definitely we've seen an increase in in-country representatives over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think the more domestic universities in the US are doing a lot more outreach from an early stage. They're talking to middle schoolers, and where I am, some universities are even making agreements and partnerships with school districts with their elementary school kids. So it's starting really early, just so they can ensure that they have some return 5-10 years down the line. They have an influx of students from local schools. But again, it's what Carmen said about communication as well. Some kids are getting 10-15 emails per day. Counselors get thousands of emails per week from reps, both local in their local area and also ones that are just traveling through. So there's a lot of impact on that.
Thanks, guys. And one of the things that I think is quite important that I've been hearing is that this enrollment cliff is changing the behavior of US universities, but also it's not necessarily impacting all states in the same way. So it'd be great to kind of share if you're seeing different states behaving in different ways, and maybe how that's impacting where you target and any specific states that you're seeing as an opportunity for UK universities.
Yeah, I mean, I think domestically, there's definitely, I think the East Coast, I used to work for East Coast organizations, and I think there's definitely a little bit of an enrollment cliff that is concerned. So I think I've seen a lot of those schools doing a little bit more coastal outreach, going to, the West Coast, the middle of the US, getting regional representatives in those areas. But I think definitely there's a lot of kind of booming metro areas like outside of the coast areas that are really good to pay attention to. I think especially kind of, like the Rocky Mountain Range, a little bit of the Midwest Great Plains, like there's definitely a lot of families that during the pandemic moved inland. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to build up networks there, reach out to schools, counselors, and, find some areas that you might have a better outreach opportunity in the next coming years.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on the coasts. And while the coasts do get, is a nice place to live, but it is also very expensive. So there's always an influx of families from California, from New York, all moving to what we call the flyover states. So there's a lot more, there's a lot more students who have that coastal mindset of going abroad and getting out of where they live and go exploring the world, that international universities can really tap into that market. It may not be glamorous. We all want to go to the glamorous locations, but going down to Kansas City, for example, Carmen has done a lot of work, and I've kind of cherry picked on the tail end of that. There is a lot of potential in places like Kansas City, St. Louis, and even some of the more suburban parts of Chicago, kind of way out in Springfield, where there are students who want to go abroad, and I think that's somewhere that we can all try and build relations with counselors if we haven't already done that before.
That's great, thank you both. And in regards to that, kind of, you've mentioned counselors, I think both of you, when talking about who you're engaging with. How do you kind of engage and kind of break through that? They're receiving thousands of emails from many different universities. You want to come and meet with them. How do you both strategize in the best way to kind of prioritize certain counselors or certain counselors within certain institutions? How do you kind of prioritize that, and how do you cut through and be ahead of some of the others that are in their list to engage with?
I think for me, what I try and do is I try and if I do meet them at a conference, or if I'm, if I meet them in person, I prefer meeting them in person, because then you kind of get to have an informal conversation about anything else, whether it's sports, whether it's just, you kind of break down that barrier, and then you build that level of trust, and then I think the relationship really does develop from there. For me, coming from a background where I worked in the UK, I worked with 2 schools in London, and I would go and see a careers advisor or talk to them, but it was very much a formal kind of, we're just going to have a conversation. And obviously a relationship developed years down the line once, I had those repeat interactions. But I feel like in the US, you have a much more personal relationship with them, especially at conferences, or any local events. They feel comfortable talking to you. And I think once you get to that point, the relationship, and you can have those conversations about students who may not meet the grades for your university, but you can be like, hey, they certainly don't fit, the merit for us, but there are other universities that they will certainly fit, and they kind of respect that relationship where you're able to have those frank conversations, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think for me, the counselors that I have the strongest relationship with, it isn't necessarily that we talk about, Queen Mary or UK universities a lot. It's a lot of times it's building that personal relationship first. Or just kind of over the course of a couple of years, like doing school visits at the same institutions. And I think like part of that is going to the school visits, part of it is like running into them at conferences, but I think there's a lot of ways that if you are thinking about going to a new area, like you can reach out to counselors if you're going to NACAC in the fall and see, who's in the app, message them, see if they have time for coffee. A lot of times, like if you can sit down and have a casual chat with them versus inviting them to formal events, they're going to give you a lot of intel about what their student body looks like, the schools in the area, do they have events, and what's the best time to come visit, and kind of where the students are at too with international ed. Do they need more support with, like what does UK higher ed look like, or is it more just kind of finding the program that's going to be the best fit? I think some schools too do virtual visits still, and that's kind of a nice way to cold outreach too. Even if students don't come, usually the counselor will pop on and have a similar conversation with you. But I think, yeah, just building those informal relationships, and I think also being a resource, like Mubsy said, it's not necessarily that you are always going to be the good fit for the students that the counselor has, but if you're able to help them, find this university that might be a good fit and a contact, or just even point them in the right way with UCAS, I think that's still an area a lot of US counselors need support. Oftentimes I find those counselor networks in those areas kind of grow organically then, because I have counselors that I've never met in person, but they say, hey, so-and-so at this other school that, like gave me your email, and, I have a couple questions. So I think, yeah, if you can build those personal relationships, it often kind of just grows over the course of a couple of years.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you both. And I think one of the things that really struck me when working with you all who are based in many different universities with representatives in the US is that you're so great at supporting one another. And I think that that's an actual resource that is there, is that asking each other and sharing insight, and like you are today, which I'm really appreciative. I'm sure many on the call are as well. But I think that consortia approach as a UK university contingency, because there's so many UK universities that in other markets we might be more competitive, but in the US it's all about promoting the UK as a destination rather than about necessarily an individual university. So where you're talking about like which counselors and which locations and things like that, I think that that's a resource in itself, is yourselves and many others that I know are working on the ground in the US. And I think you really bring great insights, and you're also very great at sharing experience and knowledge with one another. So that's something, not really a question to either of you, I just wanted to point that out, because I really appreciate it, because it's not as common, I think, in our industry and necessarily other regions. So it's not something that really strikes me as a great thing about working in the US.
Yeah, I think this being able to work together is huge, especially if like the counselors we build these relationships with, they want more of us to come to events. So if we can say like, hey, can 3 or 4 more of you come out this fall, that helps us all build that relationship then.
Absolutely. And I guess it kind of, I don't know how I'm going to segue into this, because nobody wants to start talking about politics, but I'm going to. So we know that this is a really big year for both the UK and also the US in regards to the upcoming election. I know that it's very difficult. You have to get out your crystal ball and kind of work out what's going to happen. But I guess, what are the kind of noise that you're hearing? What are the concerns from students, from counselors, parents? Is there anything that you're doing to kind of help support, yeah, any of those questions that are coming about in regards to the political changes that may come in? That's a tough question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think there are certain states that I can automatically allude to around what's going on politically, places like Florida, Texas, and to some extent Iowa as well. And I think that really does force students out of the state, as you know, as much as they don't want to be in the state. Lots of families are really considering moving out of the state because of what's going on politically. And it's hard to kind of be like, oh, we can benefit from that. But it's, you know, it's a lot of parents are thinking more, where can I send my children where they're going to get a good level of education, but also be respected for who they are. And the UK is, you know, and in a lot of places in the UK, you know, we're already a multicultural society. You know, there's so much culture and going on in the UK, it becomes a very viable option than going to college in Florida or Texas, or in some cases, Iowa. And it's just going to ramp up. The more legislations that are passed, you're going to see an exodus from a lot of these places. I mean, for example, my wife is a teacher, and in Iowa, they just passed a law where teachers can carry guns. Now, the impact of that is going to be huge moving on, because I can see it becoming a college legislation as well in the future, and that will impact where students want to go. So politically, it's very unstable, but there is, you know, a lot of benefit to that from an international standpoint, where we can say, hey, you can come study in the UK, your degree will be recognized when you come back to the US, it's cheaper, and we can do the kind of spiel that we usually give. But certainly, yeah, lots of political uncertainty for lots of students.
Yeah, and I would definitely echo, like, I've had counselors tell me that there's students that had colleges on their list that are great institutions, but because of the state they were in and the laws that have been passed, they've, you know, decided to decline their offers. But I think on the other end of that, I've had a lot of one-to-one calls this year that are a lot more personal conversations, a lot more questions about what does the political climate in the UK look like? Am I going to feel safe there? Am I going to feel like I belong? You know, not just the community at the university, but just in the city or the country as a whole. So I think that's one thing is, you know, just be really prepared to have, if you have student ambassadors, I think that's such a great resource, because, you know, I can talk about life in London, but I'm not there right now. I can't talk about what day-to-day life is like. So I think that's a great resource that connects students to, but just be, you know, being a supportive ear and really being able to connect them to the resources to help them make that decision.
And yeah, I think a lot of that will come into just kind of reassuring them that, you know, I mean, in the age of social media, you can find anything online, both negative and positive, but it's, I think, reassuring students about the support that they can get on campus, the safety of our campuses, and what we do when, you know, something does happen in the local area, and any links to, you know, the local police, and any initiatives that they have. So I think reassurance is key, and I think it works both ways politically. And there's a lot of things going on in the US and colleges right now that are swaying students' decisions both for either course. So it's just reassurance, I think.
Thank you both. I know that it's tough talking about politics because we don't know which way it's going to go for either country at the moment. But that's really helpful, and it made me think of a question actually that I think hopefully others would want to know a little bit more around, which is where there's a difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition. Just for those that maybe are less familiar with the US, it would be great if you could explain a little bit about that price differential, and then particularly those that are thinking about going out of state, as you've mentioned, maybe they're living in a state that there's some concerns about studying in state. What does that mean in regards to UK at a competitive price point? Do you feel like it's in a competitive space, or is there more that needs to be done in regards to scholarships and financial support for students?
Yeah, I would definitely say it depends on the states. I know a lot of Midwestern colleges, the in-state tuition can be quite affordable. For example, some of the UW ones, they're kind of in the 7,000 to 10,000 range, I think, right now for in-state tuition. So obviously coming overseas and paying the international student fees for a UK university might be a little bit more of an investment. But a lot of out-of-state tuition can be anywhere $20,000 to $40,000 a year at some universities, even upwards of that. Private schools as well, like those can be anywhere, between 20 to 70,000 I've seen at some universities, I think. So I think it really does depend where the students are looking. But I know there are some states that also really incentivize students to stay in state. There's going to be scholarships that they have, for a certain percentage of students to stay in state as well. So I think scholarships are kind of a concern that students really do want to see what we would have to offer for sure when they're making their decision.
Yeah, some of the in-state tuition is hard to match in some states, but then again, students who are looking at out-of-state or private institutions, that's where we're a lot more competitive in terms of our pricing. But because of the US market, students are looking at scholarships so much more than any other student. And when they are umming or ahhing about two institutions that have very similar tuition fees, scholarships will play a big part. And a lot of scholarships that I see, that it doesn't match up with the timelines because they either close too soon before they've made their decisions, or there isn't a scholarship for this particular chosen subject, or it's just not enough. And there's a couple of stumbling blocks that I think we can work with, or work to improve internationally, to help students make those decisions. Because when they're paying $25,000, $26,000, $27,000 a year, that's great, but then they only get a £1,000 scholarship, which is approximately $1,200–1,300. It's next to nothing, and not really a big decision maker for them. Whereas they have another university offering them a full ride, or a $15,000 scholarship off their tuition fees and free room and board, or whatever that might be. They're immediately going to start looking another way. So it's something that we all need to improve on, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing too is clarifying how scholarships are applied for and making them easy to find on the website, because the US, like, we do have such a centralized financial aid where you fill out the FAFSA, you get that one financial aid package from each university that has like clearly listed scholarships, work study, like loans. So I think sometimes like the scholarships can be a little confusing in the UK. But I think there definitely is that price sensitivity with the investment, especially if they're getting, full ride scholarships. So I think that's one area too. It's really good to look at what your competitors in the US are when you're like thinking about the costs and speaking to those students.
Yeah. Thank you. That's super helpful. And I think you mentioned around the timeline and it not necessarily fitting what is kind of put in place as a central timeline. What would you say is sort of the best time that students, are wanting to inquire about scholarships and what that cost will be? What sort of timeline works best, do you feel, for the US, and has that changed recently, do you find?
I think the students I've talked to, it's definitely maybe December to February when they start really looking at scholarships, especially undergrad, because they are so much more concerned with getting those early decision and early action applications into US universities. So really like September, October, November, they're so focused on writing their essays and getting those applications in. That's not really until like early spring when they're getting those financial aid packages from the US schools that they're starting to look at funding for us as well.
Yeah, I would certainly say the same. And by that point, a lot of the scholarships are close to closing. So, and some students are not looking at UK universities until that Christmas period when they're like, oh, I could apply to the UK. So I see a lot of applications that do come in that January window, and they may not schedule a meeting until February because of my travel schedule, or now we're seeing a lot more events being shifted into January, so our schedules are manic. So by the time we meet a student, deadlines might be close, or pretty much scholarships will be closed, and then they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of what their financial decision will be.
Yeah, and I think that's when, especially postgraduate, I see a lot of students defer just because they decide, it's not necessarily that I'm not going to come, but I just need the time to look at scholarships again next year, maybe save a little bit more.
Yep. Thank you. And we know that, yeah, scholarships are an important conversion piece, but I think one of the topics we're going to go on to now, which is customizing your messaging. I think you both know better than anyone what the types of questions that you're getting asked, what are the frequently asked questions, what are the parent concerns, and also some of those cultural nuances really that maybe we need to pay more attention to, and to help with our both attracting students to apply, but also converting them. So I guess, how do you both tailor your communication to really resonate with US students and to attract them to come and study at Queen Mary and at the University of Southampton?
Cameron, do you want to go?
Like, who's going first?
No, I mean, I think for my communications, I try to reach out really early on in the cycle. You know, I usually start around October when students have really started to get offers. And I try to really customize the message. If it's somebody I haven't talked to, I maybe send out like a little bit more general message, just offering a call back or to be, you know, there if they have email questions. But I think there's so many students that have already done callbacks or have met them at school visits at that point that I really do have like notes that I keep where I have to look back a little bit more and say, okay, we spoke back in June and, you know, we talked about your cat or your daughter was in the back of the call, and I'll say like, hey, how's everyone been doing, you know? So I think like having that relationship and them thinking like, hey, they remember me, like, you know, I have this relationship with the school. I think that eases them a little bit more into the decision for sure. But yeah, I think just really finding ways to customize it, which I know can be hard if you have a really big applicant pool. But I think reaching on early on, that really helps too with the timelines again, because US universities, like we're doing confirmation of offers and enrollment so much earlier in the spring and summer that I think a lot of times like we get kind of a panic from applicants because they think they should have enrolled already when we're not doing that until August. And housing applications are opening up so much later. So I think having those conversations with students really early on and being able to spell out like this is what the timeline is going to look like, that really helps with that relationship as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I try and personalize that message, and just kind of reiterate the fact that it's just more of a conversation. It's not, you know, because a lot of the time kids will see this email and get panicked and feel like that they have to act a certain way because it's a university contacted them. And I think reassuring them that, hey, it's just a conversation. It's for us to kind of like touch base and just have a chat. Carmen and I went to the Mawakak Japakat conference, and the keynote speaker was talking about communications with students, and he said it's not necessarily about you or the university. It's about meeting the student where they're at and having, you know, breaking down, you know, all the emails and things that they're getting. There's so much. Just have a conversation with them, get to know them as a person, what their interests are, and I think at that point, you know, you start to kind of get the best from that student, and they're able to ask you questions that they really feel like is important. But in some situations, if you haven't broken down that barrier, they may not feel comfortable asking you that question, or they may think it's silly to ask a question like that because it's an obvious answer. For you, for us, it might be an obvious answer, but for them, it may be the one thing that's really stuck in their mind. I've spoken to students who they're like, hey, how do I get from the airport to the campus? You know, but you know, it's such a simple question. Well, there's, you know, we have all of this information. There's public transport, but for them, it's such a huge thing. And also meeting students in like for a coffee. It's such a taboo kind of safeguarding thing in the UK, and I get it. That's just the way the UK is. But in the US, students do want to meet you. Parents do want to meet you for a coffee, or for lunch. You know, you have these meetings in settings that they feel comfortable, and you break down those barriers, and you know they really get to know you as a person. They get to know about the university. And again, it comes back to how comfortable they are with asking questions and comfortable just picking up the phone. And I know Carmen and I both do the same. We check in on our students after, you know, a month or two. We're like, hey, just checking in. How are you doing? Whether that's by email or WhatsApp or whatever that might be. And again, these are things that, you know, in the UK and when I worked there, it's emails, or you use a work phone number, the office phone, and you call those students during these hours. But it's the US. We work across 4 time zones. If you work in Hawaii, or students in Hawaii, you're in an entirely different time zone. So it's meeting students where they're at, and you know, breaking down those communication barriers, because ultimately it's not about us, it's not our journey, it's their journey, and how can we make their journey smoother. And if that means that they call you at 6 p.m. Central Time because they're based in the West Coast, I'm still going to take that phone call, because that question that they have is very important to them. And it's what can I do to help, ease that process, because they might be stressed out, and we know that applying to university is very stressful. So break down the communication, break it all down, and just make it simple for them, not about us ultimately.
I would say too, just based off that, like the less formal is sometimes the better with the communications, especially like I find the conversations I've had with students, if I do meet them in person, it's more effective to meet them one-on-one and have a coffee. Or I've literally had a student that when they found out I was in Wisconsin, they were in Chicago and they said, I will drive up the 2 hours, you meet me in Milwaukee, we will have lunch, just as I want to talk to somebody in person. So I think, yeah, like a lot of times it is, they just want to build that relationship and feel comfortable asking the questions that they feel are silly or stupid, like power outlets and things like that. And I think, like some of those students that I've had over the last couple of years, it's like by the time they're on campus, we're just communicating through emojis and me sending like quick snap, like WhatsApp links. But then I'll meet them on campus and they're so excited to see me again. Their mom's jealous that they got to have coffee with me and she didn't. So I think it really is like it's so relationship based.
Yeah, and I think there's something really nice about we might be on the road for weeks and weeks and weeks, but we meet a student with their parents, and the parents are so thankful, and they're so appreciative. And for us, we're like, hey, we're here, we're happy to do it. But there's a happiness that the parents get and the students get knowing that they've met you in person, and I think it kind of makes our job that little bit more worthwhile when we see the reaction, like from a student. They're like, thank you so much for taking 45 minutes of your time in California or in Oklahoma, wherever we might be, to sit down and meet with them. Like they appreciate that so much more. And it's those little things that kind of make our jobs a little bit more worthwhile, seeing that, their excitement and all that. So
yeah,
sure.
Thank you. And I've heard over the years the kind of types of questions you get, and sometimes they are real detailed, actually. And the size of the bed, or as you were saying,
my longest email was 47 questions so far. So
that is extensive. But I guess it would be good to understand the parent perspective. We've had this question come in from the audience. Sort of what role do the parents play, do you find, at both an undergraduate and postgraduate level? Are they heavily involved? Is it a different form of communication that you need to have with them? It would be great to hear your perspectives on working with parents. The
working with parents can either be a blessing or a curse. It really depends on the parents that you get. It is, I'm thankful that parents are involved. Some parents can be way too overbearing, and they ask questions that are very simple, but when you give the answer back, they're like, well, that makes absolutely no sense. Like, what do you mean that, student has to cook for themselves? And I'm like, well, that's, and they come from a very kind of US centric mindset, which I get. But sometimes you do want them just to kind of take a step back and just relax and let their child talk, because it's their child that's going to be going through it all. But then you also get the parents that are very inquisitive, that they're like, well, I never got the opportunity, so I really want my child to go out there and experience the world and do all this kind of stuff. And the communication with the parents can be more formal, but then again, it depends on the parent and how they approach you. Some of them are just very laid back, very relaxed, and just want to know key information. And for them, they're already sold. They're like, you go to the UK, it's a holiday for me. I can, use your bedroom for 3 years as an office or whatever. But I think, yeah, it depends on I tailor my approach depending on how the parents approach me. But it tends to be a lot more formal and much more kind of detailed in the questions that they're asking. They're really going for the specifics.
Yeah, I would agree. It definitely depends on the parent, because I think there's some parents, they just want to hop on the call like and say, hey, like, I'm gonna let my daughter talk to you, but I just wanted to say hi, and like, I'm really excited about this opportunity for them. Or they want to come along and learn everything and hear about the neighborhood because they're going to go over on spring break and they're excited just to see where their child's going to be studying. But I definitely think there are the ones who have to be more formal. They want to hear about, like, is this going to get my child a career afterwards? Like, are they going to be safe on campus? I think there are a lot of questions that, again, looking at your competitors in the US are helpful, because they are going to be asking questions about amenities that UK universities aren't necessarily going to have. you know, there's US universities that have an aquatic center with a lazy river, and that's not going to be something we can compete with necessarily. So I think just knowing like where those questions are coming from and how to translate them into the UK like education system again can be really helpful. But yeah, I think it depends so much on the family that you're speaking to. And I think even at the postgraduate level, I've had so many parents come along to callbacks. I've had students say like, you know, I'm really excited about this, but my mom's still concerned. And I say, you know, schedule another callback, like invite her to the next one. We'll chat about it. So, you know, I think they're definitely involved, like both at undergraduate and postgraduate level.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Do you have like a rough, like how many points of communication on average would you say that you're talking to a student to help to get them to the point that they're wanting to enroll and convert essentially?
It varies. There are some students that I've spoken to for about 14, 15 months, like over a year, because they're super engaged and they want to know all their information. They keep you in, keep you in the loop. And some it's just the last, they'll contact you in February, and then they're all set. You may not hear from them again for a couple of months.
Yeah, I think totally varies. I have the one that I do one callback with, and then I never hear from them again, but I see they enrolled. But then there's, you know, some of the ones that I built a closer relationship with is they'll send me an email just to say, hey, I got my CAS. I'm super excited. Like no questions. They just want to let you know how they're doing. And but there's definitely some students that I did a call back with them in October, and probably every month I'm getting 2 or 3 emails from them, just little questions about housing, or they want to hear about like what elective modules are in the course that they might be enrolling in. And so I think it really varies on the student how much they're in contact with you.
Yeah. Thank you both. And in regards to the different forms of communication, because you mentioned quite a lot about calls, are they kind of like Zoom calls? Do they prefer to like see you on camera? I know you've mentioned like the emphasis around seeing people face to face when you're in the same city as applicants. What do you think is the kind of preferred method of communication, and where do you get the least amount of interaction?
I think it varies between most of them. I think initially, I usually have a Teams call. I don't mind if they're on camera or not. Some of them are in school or using kind of a school laptop where they don't have their webcams.
I've had a lot in their car in the school parking lot at break.
Cars. Some of them are, in a random cafe somewhere in between classes or wherever that might be. So it really does vary. But yeah, definitely online calls, and then in-person meetings, and sometimes an actual phone call if I'm in the car, and I'll take my call in the car. But yeah, they're the ones for me.
Yeah, I think for most of mine, it's always in person or video. There's, you know, some students that prefer email a little bit more. And I think when they get closer to campus too, if there's students that I know they're going to have quick questions, I say, you know, just send me a text message. That's fine. Like we can find a quick time to chat if we need. But I think a lot of times like the video calls, the in person, they really want that one-on-one contact. I don't get as much engagement from like group activities or things like that. So
yeah, it sounds like you have to be quite ad hoc and quite reactive to what they're wanting. So yeah, that's great that you have that kind of personalized approach.
It works both ways as well, because sometimes whether we've got a flight delay or something, like all of a sudden now we have to take this video call from our car or in an airport terminal, wherever that might be. So it's always ad hoc, or it'll vary from month to month.
Yeah, those are always the fun relationships too. The student that knows you're on the road a lot, so they're like, "What state are you in right now? How you doing?"
Oh, that's great.
Are you ever home?
Final question on this topic before we move on, because I'm conscious of time, before we go on to the last topic, which is postgraduate recruitment. I think the final question I had on this is, we know that US universities, they do they roll out the red carpet with their campus tours. They send, all types of collateral. I think, how many hoodies can one student probably get? So I guess from a UK perspective, where it's a little bit more tricky to do some of those things, and where sustainability is such a strong part of what is going on within universities now, and trying to not print so many materials and things like that, what do you think is really important, and maybe what do people need to keep in mind from a UK perspective that works so well in the US that that's what we need to keep doing, or what we should have?
swag and merchandise go a long way. And sometimes it's small things. It doesn't have to be huge. Some universities have I've got one right now. I've got my T covered up on a university's like T logo. It's small things like this that we can do, just small bits of branding.
Yeah, like stickers.
Sometimes like they have some places have like mascots. And you think it's a sticker, but on the back they've got all of their information that they need and like QR codes. So students are able to kind of like hang them up on the wall, but know that there's information on the back of that. It is all these little small quirky things, t-shirts, really nice, fashionable like hoodies and jumpers. I feel like in the UK it's pretty much the same design over and over and over and over again, just in different colors. But US universities really hone into their kind of the athleisure wear. So it's always like really nice polos, really nice sweatshirts, with funky designs. And I think it is expensive, it's costly, but once you have that, it really makes the university stand up outside of the standard logo on one side and then name of the university on the back. It gets very boring very quickly.
Yeah, I think especially when we meet in person, it's nice to have something to hand the offer holder. Like I even got pennants, which I think are great for both the counselor offices because they'll be up on the wall for years and students will kind of look and go, hey, I want to look at that university. But the offer holders, I think, love them too because they know they can put it up on their wall. I actually, before I ordered the ones we have, I saw one of our alumni had ordered a customized one on Etsy. So there's definitely the market for them. Alumni definitely want them. So yeah, I think just finding, even if you want, like, there's still ways to be sustainable, but find, like tote bags that they're going to be using, clothes are going to last for a while. But I think definitely it's a hard thing to compete with because the US markets do go so hard on merchandise. But I think, again, that's one way we can mitigate with relationships and work on building those. So
yeah, small things for their offer holders go a long way, whether it's just a t-shirt.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a nice box of multiple gifts. So
wonderful, thank you both. And final sort of topic and question is really around postgraduate recruitment, because we know that this is going to become potentially even more important. We know that there's a risk of changes being made to the postgraduate work visa, which could have some real detrimental impact, probably impacting postgraduate recruitment more than maybe undergraduate is possibly a prediction. So I guess it would be useful to hear what you're both doing in regards to postgraduate recruitment, what is working well for you, and any sort of top tips that you have for anybody on the call around where and how best to interact with students who are looking at postgraduate courses.
I think when it comes to postgraduate recruitment, it's a difficult market. Really, you've only got two organizations that do postgraduate events. One being super expensive and the other being not the best, to put it lightly. But I think there's merit to colleges doing their own postgraduate recruitment, and that's I've had minimal success with that, but it has been, the footfall has been better than some other paid for postgraduate events, and also leaning into kind of established partnerships that every university has, and they have a market, a campus for the students who may look to go do postgraduate studies. We can tap into that market. Chances are they may have there might be a postgraduate team that you can get in contact with. And I think it's just being more, just thinking clever about how we approach that. It's great spending money on an event, but your return might be minimal. But now you've got these existing partners, so you can kill two birds with one stone. Support your study abroad and partnerships team, and you're also doing the postgraduate recruitment side of things and marketing side of things with their students.
Yeah, I would definitely say too, the events I've been to that were the universities hosting them, I think it was limited success. Especially I would focus on the ones that are more graduate only, not the graduate and career, because I feel the career ones, most of the students are looking for jobs. But I think they are usually lower cost too, so they are kind of worth if you're in the area already, like trying the event out. But definitely like, working with existing partnerships, maybe students that are already on your campus for study abroad. I think too, if you're in the area, reach out to universities that maybe you haven't engaged with, see if you can stop by their career office, or if they have a study abroad office, like maybe there's somebody you can connect with. I would say too, like there are independent educational counselors that do work only with postgraduate students. So I think that's a great one too, to look, in the organizations that have the data, like their membership database, see who works with postgrad, and see, if you're in the area, maybe grab a cup of coffee with them and, talk to them about maybe international studies for their students.
That's great.
But
Thank
I think it
you.
is definitely a little bit of a harder market with the fairs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a difficult market. A lot of US students, I mean, they think about postgraduate study really, really early on. But there are so many great options, and it's just trying to get in front of them early on. But then again comes the conversation around scholarships. A lot of the time, by the time that they applied and they've done everything, scholarships are closed. So it's how do we try and support these students when most of the time they're the ones who are self-funding their studies and their travel and just living expenses in the UK.
Yeah. I would say too, word of mouth is a huge thing too. I think a lot of times students I've talked to, they either met a home student that was studying abroad or came to the US to do their postgraduate, and they were interested in going to London then, or maybe they met an academic that used to be in London or the UK and came over to the US. So I think that's a huge one too, is finding ways to leverage like students that are coming to the US and spread the word that organically.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that something, I know in particular at Queen Mary, you've got, pretty significant number of students coming for study abroad, summer programs. So is that a way in which those students, are they coming back for postgraduate studies? And the same for Southampton. Are you finding that there's any correlation between students coming for maybe study abroad or summer programs and then coming back, 2-3 years down the line?
Yeah, I've definitely seen students like reach out and say, hey, I want to come back for postgraduate. I think the other side of that is I've had students say I didn't have time to study abroad, but my school has a partnership with your school. And so I'm very interested in looking at postgrad because I trust that relationship.
Yeah, I think it's very much, I echo what Carmen said about that. They tend to reach out and go, hey, never had the opportunity, what can I do to get there? And they're really interested at that point.
So I'm hearing kind of make sure that you're working closely with study abroad teams and also partnerships teams, and also potentially academics, right? That they're at that level, they're looking for that extra support from academics potentially.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much that we on the ground can talk about a subject, but and we can sell it until we're blue in the face, but really and truly the person who can sell it more than we can are the academics. And having academics just sit down for even half an hour. I mean, academics always say they're super busy and they haven't got time, but they will find the time to talk to a student who is really interested about their course, and we'll ask them, about the modules and the key things that the student wants to know about timetable and contact time and all the lab time, whatever that might be. The academics can sell it the most. And if they can't sell it, then there are obviously teams within those departments, whether there's an internationalization officer or someone within the department who can sell it, because they know the ins and outs of the course and the content more so than we do.
Yeah, I think especially at postgraduate, because they are self-funding a lot of times, a lot of the questions I get, there's the few general ones about housing and visas and things like that, but really when it comes down to it, it's a lot of questions about modules, like the timetables, student life, kind of what, they want to talk to a current student a lot of times too. So I think, yeah, if you have academics that are willing to talk to students, that can really make or break the student's decision.
Or hosting a
I think a lot
webinar.
of times too, yeah, well, a lot of times too, I think students have found us because they found a certain academic and realized they taught with us as well. So I think that's a great way to leverage those as well, those relationships.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I think they're sort of the main questions I wanted to ask. I've answered we've actually answered 2 of the questions that already came in. I sneakily fitted them in. But we're open to questions for the last 5 to 10 minutes. If anyone has any burning questions, please feel free to put them on the chat. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the topics we've covered today. It could be another question that you have, but it's great. We've got two different UK universities represented here, with a lot of experience of recruiting students out of the US and Canada as well. So feel free to pop any questions you might have in the chat and we will hopefully answer them. Just waiting for people to furiously type now. Oh, we've covered everything and there's no more questions, which is wonderful. Whilst we wait for maybe a question to come in, I just wanted to ask you if you've seen any changes in regards to the timeline because of the FAFSA delays that have happened in regards to the financial aid for students. Has that been having any impact this cycle that you're finding for students?
I think it's really impacted their stress levels.
Yeah.
And I think it's in some ways it's kind of made decision making a little bit harder for students, especially if they're deciding between the UK and the US. These delays, it allows us more time to kind of speak to them and kind of try and convert them. But at the same time, they might have their heart set on a university, so it's just made things harder. They're stressed out. Students are asking about what, how can I get my FAFSA in, or what happens if I don't get it in on time, and it's difficult. But that's when I feel like a lot of the time I lean on my colleagues at US colleges and be like, hey, let's, how are you guys tackling these questions? Because for me, it's the first time that I'm tackling such, serious FAFSA questions, and we all know that FAFSA is always delayed all the time. So just leaning into those, into my contacts that I have.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I've noticed the stress level just because at this time of year, students usually have all the information they need and, they're waiting for a lot of financial aid packages from US schools. And I think that's, really like they have more time to decide because so many US universities have pushed their dates back for decisions. But I think I've just noticed an increase in stress, and definitely having some colleagues in US universities has been helpful because I've been talking to them about kind of where they're at with the data they have and have they been able to actually put together offers at this point.
Yeah. That's helpful, a helpful resource, really. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to start off with the first one, which is, can you talk a little bit more around the upcoming enrolment cliff and what was mentioned at the beginning? So I don't know if either of you want to kick off, or if you want me to start off just by summarizing a little bit more around that. Yep. So for those in case you came in a little bit late, the enrolment cliff is really referring to the impact on the demographics, really, of students, college age students who, and it's really likely to hit around 2025 to 2029. They're the years that it's predicted to really impact, and there'll be a significant reduction in college age students, and that's due to the Great Recession and low birth rate at that time. And it's impacting states in very different ways. Some states and some universities in those states will have less of an impact, really, but there will be some states where it will impact so significantly that there's some predictions that there might be mergers between institutions. Some institutions may go not be able to financially keep open, and some universities may become really niche in their subject areas and just really home in on the subject areas that they're specializing in. So that's impacting in regards to students. That demographic piece will mean that US institutions, in particular in certain states, will become very competitive. But Carmen and Mubzi, anything else that you wanted to cover about what you're kind of hearing and seeing on the ground?
I think it reminds me of something similar in the UK a couple of years ago, when there was this kind of, again, it was this kind of cliff of lack of 18-year-olds who will be going to university, and I think we kind of survived. A lot of universities did merge. A lot of you saw a lot more partnerships, but I think it's a lot of these universities. I'm seeing some closures in IRA as well because they just can't establish themselves. but it's a difficult one. I think it's one of those that we'll get through it. It'll be difficult for us, and it's how can we market ourselves in a way that we are standing out from the rest of the crowd. Scholarships, more activity on the ground, looking at some of these flyover states or states that aren't glamorous to travel to, but the students are there, and we can really work with those students, I think.
Yeah, I think because it is affecting states so differently, it's really important to build like a recruitment travel plan that covers a really wide range of areas in the US. Because I think that'll help mitigate that as well, like that you're gonna not be, just traveling to one part and really feel the cliff then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I guess, that strategy piece is so important to be quite state specific rather than just having a US strategy. It's kind of working out where in the US to target, knowing what's happening around student enrollment numbers.
And I think that's another area that having a counselor network is crucial, because they really will be quite honest with you about where like the trend they're seeing with their students. So
yeah, and there's always data around kind of emerging kind of booming cities, or there's a city that's growing faster than any other city in the US.
I think always looking at those reports like top 10 growing metro areas in the US, and
that's where we need to start looking at for the next couple of years. Cities like Milwaukee is growing and Chicago is growing, and parts of the Midwest are just booming because of this, people leaving places, the bigger states and moving to these
a lot of the Rocky Mountain states too. And
Rocky Mountain states up in, I think Boise, Idaho, was it Bozeman, Montana?
That's like one of the top 1 or 2 cities right now that's growing. And it's, I think too, like not just looking at the city, but look at the suburbs in the areas as well, because those are going to be part of the greater metro area that's growing. So it's really, making a couple day plan where you can actually hit a couple different school districts then in the area.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And another question kind of links here, which is, which resources do you use to find out about recruitment events that are happening in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the NACAC fairs. Those I think can be a little bit expensive. So I think I try to limit how many of those I do each year. But I think that generally like the regional ACACs, those can be quite good, and they're usually a little bit more affordable as well. But I think again, having the counselor network has been huge for me, because a lot of times the schools host their own events and they will invite like 15 to 16 schools in the general area that you're going to get a huge pool of students. I find those events are usually quite price friendly, because they're usually free to under $100, and it'll include like a meal, like Strive Scan. But generally those students too, if you've built the counselor network relationships up, they're going to be talking to their students and preparing them for the fair like months in advance. They're going to be having a lot of information about each university, preparing them about what questions to ask, which ones might be a good fit for programs. So I find those are like a little bit more like worth the time, because like you actually have that relationship built up. You're not coming into the event cold and really just relying on the students that are walking past your table.
Yeah, and yeah, like NACAC, and there's like NAGAP and all the regional ACACs within all.
It's a bit of an alphabet soup, but
yeah, I mean,
there's the acros too, so TACRO and
and I mean they sometimes there are some amazing events, and I think it's lean into the US network of UK institutions, because we'd be more than happy to say, hey, don't bother your time or money going to this event because it's just not great. Do these other things, lean into us. And we are, although we are competitive, we're not competitors. Like, I mean, we're competitors, not competitive. Sorry, got that mixed around. We're more than happy to share information and share, the good schools and the good contacts to go to where we've seen loads of interest. Because at the end of the day, if you go into the school, we're not saying, oh, we're going to share our contacts, because one student who goes over to the UK to whatever university will come back home and be like, I had a great experience in the UK, and therefore the next year you might be 5, 10, 15 students to go across. So, we're more than happy to share all that information and just lean into that, and we'll tell you the good ACAC to join and the good events to go to.
I think sometimes too, communicating as like a group of reps is really effective, because the number of times I've told a counselor like, hey, I know there's going to be like 13 other universities in the area. They're always really happy to have us come and do a panel presentation. They'll put on a like mini fair for just UK universities, like at lunchtime. They want to maximize their students' time too. So they're really excited when they know there's a group of us that are working together and they can put on an event specifically for us.
Wonderful. Sorry, go on, Mubsy.
No, I was going to say the British school network in the US is a really good place to start, because they, once you've been to one, you can contact the other and be like, hey, I went to your sister school in Houston, and I went to your sister school in Boston, and that you can really get the ball rolling, especially if it's the first time that you're doing something like this. It's an easy way to kind of get your foot into kind of meeting counselors. Chances are most of the time a lot of them are British, so it's a familiar setting. And some of the British schools, it feels like a UK high school. Growing up in London, I go into some of them, I'm like, I feel comfortable because it's everything that I would imagine back at home.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. We've run out of time and I've been a terrible timekeeper, but thank you all for joining. And thank you, Carmen, Mubsy. I really appreciate your insight and for being with us today on the call. And if there's any questions we haven't missed, we will definitely answer them over email. And also you will get the recording, so feel free to pass this on to any colleagues that you think would find this session helpful. But a big thank you. Thank you, Mubsy, and thank you, Carmen, for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing from you both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Kate, for having us.
Thanks all for joining. Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care.